So hi folks, welcome to episode 9 of the Manx Sport podcast. So today we've got two gentlemen with us who are, you could almost say, the sort of godfathers of youth sport on the Isle of Man. The topic we're going to talk about is the Manx Youth Games, and we have the two gentlemen who are responsible for bringing that concept to the Isle of Man and transforming sport in many ways. So just like to introduce you to Gianni, Epifani and Paul Bridson. Welcome, gents, and thank you for coming with us today.
Hello.
Excellent. So, Manx Youth Games, I suppose the first question to ask you guys is where did the concept come from?
Do you want to start, Paul?
Yeah, it's going back into time a little bit. So nearly 20 years ago now, myself and Gianni were the sports development team at the time on the island, and our boss was another well-known sporting icon, Andy Varnum, and he kind of introduced us to the concept that of a youth games that was taking place throughout different jurisdictions for the United Kingdom and indeed Ireland. And we went to look at a couple of different models. One in Merseyside.
It was, yeah.
And
Youth Games.
And then we went to the Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland Youth Games,
yeah.
And had a look at their model as well. So two different events, two completely different ways of doing it, two different philosophies of why they were doing it. I'd say Merseyside was much more of a grassroots introduction into sport, and the Irish version was probably more around kind of more elite sport. If my memory serves me right, more kind of county-based sort of. I think the more performance side, a little bit of younger people. I'm not sure it was I seem to recall it was a bit different in terms of the model that they were using it for. Nevertheless, the concept was one where we kind of took elements of each. So the Irish model had an element of training sessions building up to an event for participants, if you like, to regularly train and practice together and then compete against each other on the day. And the kind of the Merseyside model there wasn't so much of a lead in a training session, it was more of just a turn up on the day.
I think that concerned us a bit at the time, whether you put a lot of energy, a lot of time into the day, and was there a legacy after it? Possibly not. So we felt with the Northern Ireland version, legacy beforehand in terms of the training sessions.
Yeah.
And then you have the games, and hopefully because of the training sessions and the games, they'll stay involved. So, as Paul said, we sort of married both concepts.
Yeah, so we took the concept from Merseyside of the grassroots element, introductory into sport, and kind of married that with the kind of training session format, build up to the day, and then competition on the day, and almost Manxified it to the model that we still have now. And it's fair to say it hasn't changed.
Yeah. I mean, the day is a fantastic day, which we obviously will talk about, but it's what happens after the day. It's just as important. So hopefully the experience of the training sessions, some sessions take place at sort of club sessions already. So that relationship between the club and the Manx Youth Games happens quite quickly or quite soon in the whole process. But the key to us is those young people continue involved in that sport, following the games. That's success for us, really.
Yeah.
So
ultimately, it's a fantastic tool for sports to help recruit new young people into their activities.
I would say that's why it's still around 19 years later. The sports are still knocking on our door saying, make sure the games continues, because it brings a conveyor belt of new young people, new members into their sport.
Excellent. And how did that first games, in terms of getting the different sports on board on that initial inaugural games, was that an easy process? Was sports, chomping at the bit to get involved, or because it was quite new, were they a bit tentative?
If my memory serves me correctly, Paul might remember as well, we did a presentation. We invited all sports that had a link with Manx Sport at the time. I think it was at Summerland, wasn't it? We did a presentation.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was at Summerland. About what we were trying to achieve through the games, just trying to sell it to them, really. And we ended up initially, I think, similar to what we have now, about 12 or 13 sports. But we had to put a bit of a sales pitch together,
right,
what the benefits were. I think we sold it around, bringing them some new members.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it was a Summerland presentation. Obviously about 2001.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, it's good that the sports are brought into it from day one, and I think, if you were to cast your mind back, Gianni, how many of those sports have continued to stay involved throughout the last sort of 19 years?
Yeah, well, you've got your mainstream sports which have been around. In badminton, Roberta Cannell.
Mm-hmm.
She was the coordinator back in 2002, and she's still a coordinator.
Crikey.
So she's been along the journey for 19 years. Basketball were involved at the start. Cricket. We'll come back to football. We'll come back to girls' football, and we might even mention football. But anyway, we'll part that for the time being. Hockey is one of the main sports. Netball. So these are the sports that have been around from the beginning.
Yeah.
Squash. Swimming, table tennis, rugby in various forms. At the moment it's tag rugby.
Mm-hmm.
Tennis was around at the start, that's been in and out. So there's been the nucleus of sports, and some athletics is one that I've missed there, which hasn't been involved for the last few years. And then we've got new sports this year. We've got BMX and sports that hop in and out. Cricket's been in at some point and come out, but inevitably when they do have a period of not being involved, they soon come back because they start to lose members, and they need to inflate the membership again. So they see the games as a way of doing that.
Excellent. I mean, you mentioned a few sports there, Gianni, that perhaps are not your typical mass participation sports, where that probably your smaller sports in terms of organisation on the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
How is the games helping those sports at the minute? Can you give me an example of some of the sort of less ordinary sports that you would associate?
Right. Well, maybe if going back to the initial games, 2002 and that sort of time, I think a sport that's really benefited from the Manx Youth Games is netball.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that's recognised as a small sport by any means, but if you go back to that period, there's no junior league. It was very much spaced around the seniors playing on a Sunday morning. Manx Youth Games started to get the sport thinking about, we've got juniors that like playing netball, and how we're going to get them from being at the Manx Youth Games to becoming senior players was then the introduction of a junior league.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Manx Youth Games was instrumental in us trying to establish that junior league. Hockey is probably another one where there wasn't an opportunity for juniors to play, but quite quickly they had to create one because we were getting a new influx of juniors through the Manx Youth Games. So for a lot of sports it was like the missing link really,
right,
in terms of playing at school and then opportunities outside of school through structure, through creating a junior league, and then pathways into senior sport. So they're the two that sort of come, I can
Absolutely.
think of.
So we've identified a few holes and different pathways for different sports. Yeah.
So I mean, at the end of the day, we try not to be prescriptive. It's a development tool for sports. So they might want to target, a certain age group. They might want to maybe try and get more girls playing the sport. Cricket have got a bit of a drive at the moment to get more females. Yeah. And more recently, probably I don't think they're involved in the first games. We've got girls football, which around 2002, 2003 really started to take off, and obviously Manx Youth Games was useful to us.
Yeah. So whatever the sort of target that a particular sport might have in terms of recruitment, they can use that youth games as a tool really to sort of.
I think we've tried to avoid, from a safeguard and governance perspective, we've got to be quite prescriptive. That's the right word to use. But we've tried to stay clear of being prescriptive to the sports and say you've got to use the games for this. It's ultimately they decide themselves, and that's where you get more of a buy-in and a better relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about safeguarding and governance there as well, Gianni. From what I can see, the games has also played a large part in providing a lot of training for local volunteers and coaches as well. I mean, can you give us an example of how the level of support there is out there for people to get involved with various courses?
Well, I think from the start, Paul, we wanted to make sure that it was, in terms of safeguarding, using qualified coaches, first aid, that we sort of nailed that really from the first games. So again, to help that, we offered free training. So that's back in the early days. I think that's the first time we offered any sort of child protection or safeguard training, which probably resulted in the Manx Youth Games, really.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. I mean, it was really important that the children and indeed the Ireland community knew they were going to get a positive and safe environment for young people, you know, to participate in. And it seems funny that we're talking about, you know, safeguarding in that in that way now, because it's the norm now.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And we wouldn't think twice about, you know, those kind of things. It is the norm that everyone has had a DBS check and they've been on a safeguarding and protecting children workshop. They're a qualified coach and they know how to deliver emergency first aid if they need to. But 20 years ago, I remember there being, you know, we were almost at the kind of the beginning of that, or the cusp of that sort of change, where we were taking sports maybe who run by fabulous volunteers who give up a hell of a lot of time and do an incredible job, and it was almost the beginnings of the professionalisation of some of these things, and basically saying that, look, for you to be involved in this initiative, these are the kind of the basic service level agreements that we would want. And I remember a little bit of resistance at the time. Not everybody was on board with it, not because they didn't necessarily agree with it or understand it, but it was a change. It was change from what they'd ordinarily done. Well, we never had to do this before. Now we have equality policies, we have health and safety policies, we have safeguarding policies. It is the norm now. But 20 years ago it was a little bit different, and I think the Manx Youth Games was the catalyst for a lot of that kind of coming in, if I remember correctly. And you know, in some respects, it's maybe helped nudge sports in a direction of good governance and best practice. We had a responsibility, obviously, we work for government. Manx Sport and Recreation is a part of government. That it was a government initiative that was in partnership with the local governing bodies, and we had to make sure that you know, we did it along the lines of the kind of the best practice that was recommended and advised at that, you know, at that time.
Yeah, I think just going with the way things have progressed, so I think we had to lead by example at that time. But now sports should be delivering their sessions anyway with qualified coaches, coaches that have been safeguard trained and DBS checked, not only for Manx Youth Games sessions. That's what they should be doing anyway. So that's the direction of travel that we've gone in. But 20 years ago, the landscape was a lot different.
Well, it's a fantastic catalyst, because I think if you look at the information that's coming from the national governing bodies of sport now,
for sure,
you know, it's part and parcel of being a sports coach, isn't it? You've got to have all of these different bits of paperwork in order to make sure that you can evidence you're providing a safe and enjoyable environment for young people to go to, and giving parents that confidence that they're going to be going through a well-run, you know, a well-run event and a well-run sport. Yeah,
well, I would say it's because of the games that we've now got tutors on the island who can deliver safeguard training, and we now deliver safeguard training every 12 weeks. And I say a lot of that's down to the Manx Youth Games and leading us in that way.
Excellent. I mean, looking at in terms of impact, I mean, the Games has been a great catalyst for bringing lots of different young people into the sport. Do you think it's helped sports to grow their number of volunteers and coaches as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, 13, 14, 15 sports. A lot of these children, young people turn up for the first time, bring along their parents, and the clever sports will grab the parents as well as the children, and you know, and the young people. Just an example that springs to mind is Malc Lewis, who's the table tennis coordinator. I think he brought along his son to an early table tennis session back 2003, 2004. He's now the coordinator, but before he got to be the coordinator, he started doing a bit of coaching, started playing himself. I think he's one of the Ireland champions now in one of the age groups, and now he's the coordinator. I think he's been chairperson, president of the table tennis.
Right.
All that started by bringing his young lad, you know, to a Manx Youth Games training session, and there's similar stories across all sports really. So I say every year, you know, we've been a conveyor belt of new junior members, but I'd also say we've been a conveyor belt of new volunteers as well, which without them we wouldn't have a Games. Simple as that.
It's really helped to grow the sport and community in the island, hasn't it? Which has always been very big. And I think it's just helped to really get families and communities working together, in a really big way. Yeah. It's really impressive.
Well, just going back again to the start of the first games, we were very conscious that we didn't want to make it an Eastern-based event either for the day itself. It is because it's based at the NSC. But we want to make sure wherever you lived on the island, there's opportunities in your region. So obviously we split the island into 5 regions. We like to say for most of the sports, wherever you live, the training sessions are on your doorstep. And that was something very conscious of at the start, wasn't it?
Yeah, the regional thing was a key consideration, and accessibility into sport, regardless of your postcode or your socio-economic status. Mm-hmm. So, as Gianni said, the only barrier for us to deliver against that objective was facilities. So, if we take, for example, squash, there are not squash facilities all around the island, and so children are limited or restricted depending upon where they live. That there's not a squash court really close by. Fortunately, that's an exception rather than the norm, and the norm generally is around the island there are facilities, whether it be hockey pitches, football pitches, sports halls for the indoor sports, swimming pools, etc., etc. So the fact that children didn't have to travel very, very far to access a weekly training session. In fact, probably the most they'd have to travel would probably be 3 or 4 miles. The cost was kept really low. In fact, myself and Gianni often laugh about this. But when the games first started in 2002, the training sessions were 50p, and I defy any product now that was 50p in 2002 to only be £1 now in 2019. So I'm not sure whether we're really, really cheap now or we were really, really expensive in 2002. But cost, it was carefully thought out in the sense of, well, we want to make sure that we don't prevent any children or indeed families from accessing the opportunity, and that cost should be a barrier. So we can remove the cost barrier, if we can remove the transport barrier, and in terms of accessibility, then we've got a pretty good chance of getting lots of children involved in sport. And again, that they were some of those things is what we picked up when we went to look at different models. And when I said before, right at the outset of our discussion, in Manxifying it, we looked at what other places were doing, but we also looked at what was important to us, and indeed culturally, what were some of the challenges. So we laugh, don't we? We live on an island which is quite small, and if we were to pick us up and put us in the UK, it would be a very, very small place, and people wouldn't think twice probably of travelling quite longish distances. But in Isle of Man terms, longish distances are a big issue, and if it's not literally round the corner, I'm not going that far. It's all the way over there, and in a different village. And so that was a real, we had to kind of recognise that we were never going to change the culture or the way people viewed the Isle of Man in terms of travel and in terms of distances. We had to find a way around, dealing with that. And so the regionalisation also then became, in some instances, born out of new clubs established in those areas and those regions on the Isle of Man, and it provided a platform for those sports to develop a new club in a particular part of the island. And I think that has been another huge benefit of the games in its legacy of people see what it does on the day. It's the shiny cherry on top of the cake, on top of the icing kind of thing, and it's a wonderful day, but the ripple effect, if you like, to if you're throwing that sort of stone into a pond, and the ripples that kind of go out of all the other things and all the other benefits and that it brings is 10-20 fold, and that's just another example, really.
But in terms of what Paul's just explained or outlined there's 2 things that make it happen. First one is the army of volunteers, so we can deliver 13-14 different sports in 5 regions. That needs a lot of coaches, a lot of volunteers every evenings, weekends, and also the fantastic relationship we have with our sponsors, HSBC, who've been with us since 2002.
That's a feat in itself, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So with their support and involvement, we can keep the cost down to initially 50p and £1. So as Paul said, that's a barrier that's been taken away. So there's two unique things that have helped us to do what we do. And
I think it's fair to say the games would certainly not have lasted the length of time they have without those two key ingredients that Gianni's just talked about. They are right at the centre of the games, and without them, take either one away, we wouldn't have an event. We're the lucky ones, and we always have this conversation as well. That we're the professionals, and it's our job, and we get paid to do what we do. But the number of people around the island who, as Gianni said, on a regular basis, in all sorts of weathers, give up their time to help the next generation of young people develop in sport is unbelievable, incredible, and their value to the Isle of Man community and the Isle of Man economy for what they do is absolutely incredible. And sport, the volunteers are the backbone of sport. We know that. And I think sometimes it's really important that we acknowledge the value that they play and just how important they are, and we recognise that, and indeed are hugely grateful to all that they do.
Absolutely.
No, absolutely. No, volunteers, without them, sport wouldn't happen, would it, at all? And the Manx Youth Games in particular, like you say, it just seems to pull lots of different people together from different walks of life, and really helps to provide some fantastic opportunities, and opportunities for them to develop as well as volunteers. So it's interesting to see young people who come in into the sport with their mum or their dad who perhaps gets into coaching or something like that. I was going to touch on, are there any success stories of young people who've gone on to follow bigger and better things in sport at higher levels?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about it earlier. The one, the name that always jumps out is Josh Green. He now works for us. He started, I think it was 2003. He picked up a badminton racket for the first time, and quite quickly, I think 10 years later, he was Commonwealth Games for the Isle of Man and playing for Great Britain, played for England at all those levels. I don't think anyone else.
Did Joe Reid and Catherine Reid get involved by the Manx Youth Games?
I know, I'm not sure if they did, Trev. I know Gemma and Sarah Aston started in athletics, and obviously both went on to compete at a very high level. Gemma works for us now as well.
Ben Granger.
Ben Granger, the Paralympic swimmer who potentially could be in Tokyo this summer. Ben started at a Northern swimming session several years ago. But I'm sure we've missed some, but it has created a platform for a performance, at performance level. But there's lots of different stories who've young people have got involved initially as a competitor, and stayed on and on, joined committees, become treasurers, become secretaries, become chairs, become coordinators, become part of that club, that community, which you've touched on. Once you get involved in the community sport, we can't all be Olympians, we can't all be world champions, but we can all be part of a club. So it's very inclusive in that way.
Absolutely. And what sort of numbers are we talking? How many people are getting involved in terms of competitors on an annual basis?
Well, every year, the range between 1,100 to 1,300 children, young people. Obviously, not all of those are going to join a club, but a certain percentage of those are going to join a club. After the next generation. Maths isn't my strong point, but in terms of weekly attendances across training sessions, there's a lot of young people from January to May regularly. So you not only got the opportunity to join a club and be put on over that journey for to keep involved in sport. Obviously, we haven't touched on the health benefits as well, so it's got a role to play there, and making sure young people have got the opportunity to be active or to go and, as we say, on their doorstep, get involved in sport. So it's got the health benefits as well, but for us it's very much getting involved long term by getting involved in community sport. Yeah.
Well, I suppose it fits very well with the Manx Sport and Recreation motto, which is, Gianni?
Paul will tell you that.
Bit disappointed that both of you are passing the baton. I thought it was going to be rubber stamped all on your minds, but no, obviously our strategic vision is more people, more active, more often. And as I'm sure you both knew that, and you were just giving me the courtesy of listening to me speak about it. But Yeah, you touched there around high performance, and undoubtedly there will be a small number of young people who've become high performing athletes.
Yeah.
I think it's probably quite important to say that whilst it's a benefit, it's not the reason we do the Manx Youth Games. And for those people kind of listening to almost sort of our philosophy is very much around an introduction into sport. Have a go, try something. It might be for you, it might not be for you.
Yeah.
Get involved with a club and play recreationally, socially, and have fun. And if it takes you to a high performing platform, great. If it doesn't, that's still success for us. That the event is brought you into sport, and you've kept involved in sport, and as G's touched on, played for a number of years, progressed into an adult club, and even when you can't play as an adult, give up your time to then help at the Manx Youth Games and volunteer and coach, or be one of those executive officials on a committee, and generally just involved, and that for us is success. And I think it's fair to say that there are probably many, many, many more of those successes than there are of people becoming world and Olympic champions as a result of the Manx Youth Games. That's not to say that it can't happen and it won't happen. We know there is a good chance that there could be a world champion or an Olympic champion sat in a primary school classroom today. They just don't know it yet. And the journey that they take to becoming that champion can be through the Manx Youth Games. It can be through the governing body for which a sport they're already involved in, or maybe they haven't even found that sport yet, and it will take various different routes and highs and lows along the way. The Manx Youth Games is a potentially a key piece of the jigsaw puzzle, but not the be and end all if it doesn't produce those.
I think we all know the job that we do. That first experience that young person has, whether it be at the first Manx Youth Games session or arriving at a local club or even after school club, is crucial really. If you give them that right experience, and obviously fun's an element of that. We've always stayed clear away from results. We're not interested in results for the Manx Youth Games on the day itself. In terms of who comes second, who comes third, doesn't really matter. As long as they have a great day, fun-filled day, training sessions, again, the similar theme. And that's why every young person will go home with a medal, every young person will go home with a water bottle, T-shirt. I hope that, and as we've recognised, that then could be the catalyst to go on and get involved in a more competitive environment. But for sure, at that stage, it's just making sure it's giving them an experience that says, wow, this is great, this. I love, sport can be a really positive thing, and then they can go and continue. If we get that bit wrong, as we know, it can be hard to reverse.
And what I think is particularly good about it as well, with so many sports on offer, it's a real opportunity for people to try something they've never done before.
Of course,
as well. And when I've done Manx Youth Games assemblies and yourself, G, it's one of the key points that we hit home.
This morning at my first assembly,
And and I can also speak from the experience of being a parent now who's actually sent a child to their first Manx Youth Games last year. My daughter was definitely sold on your assemblies, Gianni, with the offer of the medal as soon as the medal came out.
Solid gold.
She was sold, and she loved it. She did tag rugby, and she had a brilliant time. And she can't wait to see this year's assembly and perhaps try a different sport this year.
Good. So assembly, that's an important role as well. That's an important part to play.
Well, that's it. How the kids find out about it. It's the main event, isn't it?
So it's an opportunity to thank UCM and their students. Again, they've been involved since 2002. So their team, the arts team, the studio team up at UCM, the students there as part of their course. They do the filming on the day and then produce a fantastic film, which again we use to sell the game. So at the moment we've got the 2019 film, and we played it for the first time today, obviously promoting the 2020 games. And
there's a real buzz in the assemblies when the kids are watching that film, because they're really looking out to see if they can see if they're in it
themselves or
or someone they know.
Absolutely.
You know, and at the end of every assembly I'd always ask, did you see people you know? And there'd always be lots of hands going up, or people who've been through the school before.
Of course, yeah.
You know,
I think it's funny we talk about time, and we're obviously going to sound really old, but 20 or 19 years ago, it wasn't very easy to what I call access video on an there was no iPhones, there was no tablets.
To say the least, yeah.
So we would bring probably a tape recorder,
VHS,
and so for kids then that was a real novelty, because now they access YouTube and videos and all sorts like 10 a penny. But if I go back in time, that buzz, because now our Manx Youth Games will finish, at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and parents, kids themselves who've filmed little bits and uploaded onto their social media accounts, and it's viral within minutes, and you can see stuff. You go back and to the 2003, 4, etc. That was not the case, and so when you come around with a video, it was a real novelty. But I think that buzz, that buzz still exists.
Yeah.
And the children who like to see themselves participating and see their friends and what have you, it does cause a nice stir, and kind of inspires them to want
for
to
those 3.5, 4 minutes. I mean, today at QE2, even for years 7 and 8, everyone's quiet and staring at the screen, and then see themselves, and then they tell you after when you're walking out, I was on that film. So yeah, it's great.
So we've got the launch of the Manx Youth Games coming up in January. Obviously, we're recording this just before Christmas, but it's quite fitting that we're doing this podcast now. So when is the launch, and when do training sessions start, Gianni?
The training sessions start on Monday the 27th. But to get around all the schools, especially now the secondary schools, most school years have their own assembly. So, lots of assemblies started today. So we've got QE2 this week, and then we'll start properly really on January the 6th. So between myself and the rest of the team, by the first training session starting, we've delivered an assembly in every primary and secondary school. So bar any mishaps, that should happen. So we've got a 4 or 5 week window to do that. The launch is a week before the first training sessions on the 20th of January, which will be in this room here at the Institute.
Fantastic.
And this year, we've got Sinead Reid, who's coming over to help launch. She's BMX former world champion, been to Olympics as a BMX and a track cyclist. It's got that link with HSBC. They support British cycling, so we've got BMX for the first time in this year's games. She's coming over to try and sell that and be an ambassador for BMX and for the games, for the launch.
Awesome. Hopefully that'll help really raise the profile even more, and
absolutely,
and give BMX that kick start with its first year in the games as well.
So it's nice to see her over, and I think sports had an important part to play in her life. So it'll be nice to hear her journey, and hopefully that'll help. It'll be a great start for this year's games.
Fantastic. And when's the big day itself, Gianni?
The big day itself is for the 19th games is the 16th of May.
16th of May.
And then the day after, we start thinking about massive. It's 20 years, 2021. So that's going to be a massive year, to celebrate to 20 years of the Manx Youth Games, HSBC Manx Youth Games.
Can you give us any inside information, any special celebrations for that one, G?
Let's get this year's games out of the way first.
Excellent. Well, we'll draw that to a close now, guys. I really appreciate you coming in
thank you.
and sharing your experiences of the games over the past nearly 20 years. Yeah. And I wish you all the best for this year's games. Cheers. And for all the games to come in the future.
Thanks, Trev.
Thank you, gents.
Thank you.